Everybody, Speedy Husky here. I wanted to do a quick overview of how to disassemble a Borg clock and a General Time Corp clock for my 67 Eldorado. I didn't really see any videos online on how to do this, so I figured, hey, this is a prime opportunity. I've got my original clock, which is kind of rusty, crusty, not working, missing some parts, locked up. And I have the replacement clock that I purchased from another 67 DeVille. And so what I was trying to do is do a direct swap, but I learned that my 67 DeVille clock is a little sticky. It's the original mechanical movement, electrical mechanical movement, and actually both of them are. And I was going to convert this to quartz, but I learned that the Borg made clock and the General Time Corp clock are not the same. And I'll show you the differences briefly here, and then also how to disassemble these things, and how I oiled the new clock as well to try to avoid having to spend the big dollars to retrofit the General Time Corp clock. So real quick, the Borg made clocks have readily available quartz conversion movements. The General Time do not. So when you look at these clocks, you can't really tell other than the shape of the bezel, the front face bezel, how they mount. The backs of the clocks on both of these are pretty much the same. The only difference between the General Time and the Borg made clock, when you look at them, is the clock position of the electrical connector. Mine is actually clocked at about 830 if you're looking at this with the bolts horizontal. But both clocks will actually bolt right into my 67 Eldorado cluster without any issue. But as I said, I learned I can't do the conversion. So to get these things apart, my hands on this particular clock, I mean, these are 50-year-old clocks, so these are very delicate. You want to be very careful. There's a couple ways you can get them off. To disassemble the clock, you can use a plastic panel removal tool. If you have a smaller one than this, it would be better, but you want to get under the second hand and don't pry on the needle itself, and just get under it very carefully, hold it with your thumb, and pull straight off if at all possible. Now, it's not going to come off that easy. I've already had this clock apart. I figured, I'm going to show you guys why I got a dead clock here. Why not? Try not to try not to destroy any of these pieces. People do use these clocks and refurbish them. They're getting harder and harder to find. If you don't have a plastic panel removal tool, you can use a fork if you're super careful. Same principle applies. Very gently get under the dial, and of course I pushed this one down too far when I put it back on, and hold your thumb, and you can get these off. I pulled both of mine off at the same time. A production clock, you'll be able to get between them and pull each one off. So set those aside once that's off. You notice on my clock I'm missing the adjustment knob. Mine actually rusted and broke off, so that's why I looked at a complete replacement. So the next thing to disassemble this thing, because it doesn't really look like you can take it apart very easily, there's these little metal tabs on the Borg clock in the form of an H, at least on my 67. So very carefully, these will be bent over flat. So you'll bend them straight, very carefully, all four, and then you'll detach them from the H groove. So this one's already loose, so I'll lift this off so you can kind of see. I'm going to carefully lift this off. And these are brittle. The more you bend them, the easier they will be to snap off. So you can see the little slot that this tab will set in and bend over. So there's your face. Set that aside. The next thing you'll notice is these metal tabs on the side. They're vertical on mine only because I've bent them straight so I can remove the center of the movement, but these will be peened over and on top of this plate to hold this plate in place. There was also peened here and here. So what I did is I took a pair of pliers and carefully rolled that steel back to allow this plate to be removed. Same thing here, these are bent over. I just take a pair of pliers, open them up, Once you do that on those 4 spots, this allows you to raise out the entire movement from the case. And the back has a bushing. As you can see, mine's kind of rotted, but it simply just pulls out after that. So there's this case, and then here's your movement itself. Now, if I had the adjustment rod, there would be a gear here, and this is how you set your time. But as you can see, this movement still works. It's just got so much corrosion on the inside of it that it needs to be thoroughly cleaned and then repaired with a new rod. I don't know of who may have that rod, but anyway, you get the idea. So that's kind of how the Borg clock comes apart. And it's a little bit different. This one was made in early '67, and then some point in time they switched over to the general clock. To put this thing back in, you just line it up, put it in, set it down, and then you can re-peen over these points when you get done replacing it. Just make sure your electrical connector's lined up. So anyway, so that's the Borg clock. Essentially, that's how this thing comes apart. Now, move that aside. The General Time Corp clock comes apart very similarly, except for there are only 3 hold-down points on a General Time clock. The bushing is a little bit different, and if you notice, it's clocked in a different position. So it still works in the housing from these mounting points in the shape of the housing. It still works. And you can say mine is still stamped December 26th of 1967. That's when this one was made. So the tabs come off the same way. You just very gently bend them up. But these don't come off the sides. They actually go through the hoops. So this is loose, so I'm going to very carefully take it off, because this is my good clock. I don't want to break it. So there's my face. Try not to put fingerprints on the face. The hands come off the same way, but try to keep your fingers out of here. It's very, very difficult to clean. And if you try to use a cleaner on the clock points, it will take the ink off. So here is the General Time Corp, and you can see the little slots that the face mounts into. Same thing here. The case is actually peened over in these spots, and you just open those up with a pair of vice grips pliers. Very carefully open it up so you can remove it. Now, one thing I noticed on the General Time Corp, there's this little washer and spring underneath the face, and you can see it there. If you take those off, set those aside, don't lose those. You want to keep those if at all possible. So once you clean off the peen points, you can gently lift this whole movement completely out of the clock. And as you can see, I've already cleaned this out and put electro grease on the bushing, so it's a little bit easier to put in. But here's my clock movement itself. It's completely clocked differently than the Borg clock. What I did is I took, because this movement does work, it's just sticky, I cleaned it with a electrical cleaner, and then I used this super lube to lubricate the pivot points around the clock. So this movement, I had a very difficult time turning and adjusting these gears. Now I can turn them a lot easier to make adjustments to the clock. And it should be even more easy with the actual knob on here. So all of the gears themselves, and I know you clock guys will probably cringe, but because this is so tight, I lubricated the pivots themselves on each gear. I put a very small amount on the gears themselves, in addition to lubricated the other points where they would pivot as much as possible to try to free this thing up. So now that I've oiled it, I'm going to put it back into the housing very carefully. I'm going to line up my connection here. I'm going to gently push this down, and then I'm going to peen these back over to hold the movement in place. Put my face back on, and then I'll put my my hands back on, and then I'll connect this to a battery and let it run for probably 24 hours just to make sure that the clock is keeping time. And that's kind of my go at it. If it doesn't keep time, then I'll just pony up and pay the conversion money to have it converted to a quartz movement. But I really do like the Tick-Tock original clock in these things. So anyway, that's long story short, or short story long. That's how you tear apart these Cadillac clocks. Hopefully it helps one of you guys. And give me a like, give me a follow, and let me know what you think. Talk to you later. Bye.